Treasure Haynes, and I'm also known as the Cat Shrink. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and how I got into working with cats, and a little bit about the program that I use, I call Feline Dialectical Behavior Therapy, that seems to work for cats that come from difficult backgrounds. For myself, I got into cat rescue about 15 years ago. It started innocently, of course. Took a couple fosters in and realized that the need was really great. And I found that I had quite an affinity for the cats that had really bad stories and had a rough time or weren't finding good fosters or had behavior issues. Myself, I suffer from complex PTSD. So I kind of understand what it's like to go through trauma or go through difficulty and then, have difficulty reintegrating or dealing with the world around you. And myself, I participated in dialectical behavior therapy as part of my own journey to healing, and several other members of my family also did the same. And through that program, you develop a toolkit that's very much based around challenges and addressing trauma, not just from a mental construct, but also from a physiological one. If you look at, for example, the brain scans of people with post-traumatic stress syndrome or complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, the science shows that their brains are actually physically changed. And this is a concept that they talk about in neurology for the geeks out there that are like me into this kind of thing as neuroplasticity. So, trauma can create brain damage, but also through various tools and work and activities, we can actually physically change the structure of our brain to create good pathways that are helpful and that can lead to outcomes that aren't just like a temporary fix, but they're actually an outcome that is long term. So, for people that struggle with mental illness, they're probably always going to struggle with that, but having the tools to do that and to create some of those neuroplastic events that create better connections can help them to succeed in the long run. And that trauma is carried not only neurologically, but in the central nervous system. Much of what happens within dialectical behavior therapy affects your thought processes, but it also what follows is it affects your nervous system and how that reacts. There are some really, really amazing psychotherapists, such as Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and talks about how trauma actually hides in the body and can come in if you don't deal with it, kind of come back later and affect you. And through my work, working with messed up cats, I guess you could say, for various different reasons, um, watching and observing how they interacted with each other, with their world, how they reacted to stimulus, and just understanding from reading and research and all of those things, knowing that cats are very, very neurologically based animals, very central nervous system run animals, in that they're prey animals, they're also predator animals. So they, in their natural environments, it's really, really important for them to be aware of everything that's going on and on a hyper level. So when you have a cat, um, that's been through trauma, one has to assume that this same type of processes happen. Their brains are just like our brains from a physiological standpoint in terms of neural connections and how they work. So I thought to myself, well, I want to find a better way to help some of these cats. And wouldn't it be interesting if some of the things that we do for people that are very successful in various ways in dealing with deep trauma and creating coping mechanisms could also work for cats. Problem being is that cats don't talk, and you can't have logical conversations with a cat. You can't explore with them what's wrong, what their problems are. So, how do you engineer a type of work or therapy with an animal that can't communicate that way? Um, the reality is cats communicate very well. And if you're ready to accept their communication and look and have a little bit of understanding of how to interpret what it means, you can kind of reverse engineer some of those principles to them. You just can't do it with words. So, what I started to do was apply some of the things that I had learned for myself, things that worked for me, and try to figure out, okay, so how do I put this into cat speak? I can't have a conversation, explain to them what I'm doing, but somehow it's important for me to convey that this activity that we're doing is safe or that this is beneficial to them. I also learned through vast experience dealing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cats is that cats are energy based animals. Cat people know this. Sometimes even people who don't like cats know this because cats tend to pick up on energy and react, and sometimes they react in extremes because that's the only way they know how. But they do very much pick up on that energy. If you have animals in distress and you have people that genuinely want to help, the animals will sense that energy and often will be calm, even wild animals, and allow that person to help because they understand, based on the energy that they're being approached with, that that is not a threat, that that is actually a good thing, and that that person is there to help them. Cats are very much the same in terms of reading energy. They just don't have the option of turning it off. So they're reading all of the energy. A lot of the things that we as people, for example, kind of let go by the radar. When you ask somebody how they're doing, they say, I'm okay, kind of leave it at that. But if you say I'm okay and then put yourself in front of a cat, that cat's gonna know whether you're fooling yourself or whether you're just saying that. Like you can't fool them with your energy. And this piece of understanding became a very valuable tool in how I was working with these cats in terms of conveying um, my intent to them. It might seem a little bit hokey, but a lot of science is coming to kind of prove out this level of energy and how it can affect situations and how it can affect animals and how they react to it. Still kind of in infancy stages in a lot of cases. So some of the work that I'm doing is kind of pioneering in some ways. And I'm learning as I go. I don't claim to know everything, not by a long shot. My cats and everybody else's cats teach me new things every day. And it kind of goes into that big lexicon of information and knowledge that we collect over time. I have an amazing group called the Cat Shrink, where I have some incredible people that have worked with me in rescue and run my program with their cats. Didn't have a really name for it then, but it was the program that they were running with and had a lot of success in, and they in turn wanted to help other people and other rescue cats and whatnot. So we have quite an interesting brain trust of people, and even the people that come with problems. Like you learn so much from the process of what other people's experiences are, and it just all kind of comes together to create better solutions. So enough about that. A little bit more about cats. Uh, Cats in general, people think they're snobby, people think they're stuck up, people think they're aloof and not very social. But a lot of the science that we have coming out now, and people who love cats, and cat owners and cat people, have long known this, that cats are deeply complex, emotional animals. They're socially complex. So when we're looking in terms of intelligence, um, people say, "Oh, well, a dog's as smart as a kid," and those kind of things. Intelligence is one thing, but emotional intelligence and emotional complexity are very different things. Dogs are intelligent animals and they can be complex animals, but in terms of like a social structure, they're actually relatively simple. They follow the pack structure. There's, established hierarchies. They do understand emotional concepts to a certain extent. But in terms of their interactions with each other and their interactions with humans, the complexity of that social structure is quite simple in general terms. It's more like children on a playground. Whereas if you look at cats and you look at the way they interact with each other and the nuances therein and the way that they interact with their humans and with strangers and all of that, It's very, very clear very quickly for people that observe cats a lot that they are a lot more socially complex. Their understanding of things that might seem beyond their intelligence level can be pretty spectacular because people think just intelligence. But the reality is a lot of the situations that we look at as requiring basic intelligence are actually emotional intelligence or social intelligence. And in those arenas, cats are really, really complicated. They understand when they're abandoned by somebody they love. They understand loss. They understand malice. They understand grief. They understand happiness. They understand joy. They understand those feelings. They share those things amongst themselves and in a very complex way. They just do it in a way that we as humans don't necessarily readily recognize as, you know, manifestations of those emotions or communications because they don't talk. And dogs will tend to adapt more of their communication styles to humans. Cats will do this to some extent, but they're much more kind of instinctually driven in terms of how they communicate. So there's certain lines of communication they'll fall back to that we as humans might not pick up because we're not looking for that type of communication or be able to interpret that for what it is. Big way that the biggest way really that cats communicate isn't so much with vocals or anything like that. They communicate very much with body language, and much of their communication is very subtle, and it's a lot easier to either miss or to misinterpret. There are certain things that we're taught about cats, like when their tail's swishing and those kinds of things that are kind of like it's this or it's that. It's a black and white. Whereas I found in my work that a lot of times those signals on their own can't you can't really interpret that alone. You have to look at the context of the other behavior in the situation to really understand what it is they're trying to tell you. So a cat with a swishing tail might be feeling aggressive or annoyed, but they might also be feeling curious or interested, or maybe even a little bit unsure. They're kind of making up their minds. There are a lot of different interpretations that can come. Another thing that I find is another type of cat communication that I find is often misinterpreted is the hiss. Um, uh, Cats will hiss for multiple reasons, not just because they're feeling aggressive. More likely, a cat's going to hiss at you because they're feeling nervous or anxious or unsure or a little scared. It's more of a warning. It's kind of, I don't know what's going on here. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but it's not followed up with anything else. So that piece of communication on its own, unless you're looking at the context of the situation, somebody says, hey, the cat's hissing. Okay, well, what else is going on? Is the cat afraid? Is the cat feeling unsure about something? Is the cat in a new environment? Is there, what other factors are there? Because a hiss on its own is only one word out of a sentence. So understanding some of those complexities and how automatic reactions to stimulation, certain types of stimulation will cause cats to react, and how they can develop some behaviors out of this that we as people and the ones who have to live with them or who live with them have to deal with on the other side. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and also the cat not knowing a better way to express that feeling or what's motivating them to react in that moment. That sounds kind of complex. I'll try and break it down into something a little bit more simple. Um, Again, with the hiss, looking at the context of a situation and understanding that a cat hissed, um, but they're in a new place. They don't know what's going on, so they're a little bit confused. There's nothing that's actually a threat. But to a cat's nervous system and to the instincts that drive a cat's reactions, they're in hypervigilance mode. They're under threat. So regardless of or not of whether their logical brain understands that there is no actual threat present and that they're just in an unfamiliar place, their reactions are going to be in accordance with what their nervous system and what their instincts are telling them is a problem. So That hiss is their nervous system taking that energy, being, nervous about the situation, not really knowing what's going on, and needing to express that energy in some way or another. And it's not a thoughtful process, it's an automatic reaction. It's like when you get scared and you go, it can be very much like that. It's not necessarily an intentional type of thing. Again, context matters so much in these situations, in these types of communication. So how do you convey this to people and kind of teach them what it is and what is my cat actually telling me without knowing every single little in and out of these types of things? So that was another type of challenge I had to figure out, and I broke it down into a little bit simpler type of understanding. Owners and the cat people out there, they're going, all right, lay it on me. How do we make this simple? And it is simple, but it's important to understand certain concepts first. As humans, when we encounter issues or whatever, yes, we have emotional reactions, we have automatic reactions. If we're scared, we're startled, we're going to react. But ultimately, we have a time period of kind of a latency period in there where we have our higher thoughts will kick in and kind of take over and then guide our behavior and our reaction to a situation. Anybody who deals with mental illness issues, though, things like anxiety or ADHD, um, complex trauma, for example, they understand that when they're in a certain place or when they're threatened or when their nervous system is overwhelmed, that higher thought kind of shuts down and they're working entirely based off of their nervous system reactions and their automatic reactions to that type of stimulation. And cats are very similar to actually humans who have experienced complex trauma in that they don't really have that capability of higher thought in terms of reacting to stimulation. They just react. Um, and so their nervous system is always tweaked. It's always, taking in a bunch of information because in their natural environment, if they're surviving out in the world, as both predator and prey animals, they have to constantly be taking in all of this information, evaluating it, making, doing the thing that is either going to save them from being eaten by something else or allows them to eat dinner that night. So they don't really have the option to turn off, per se, those reactions. They just react. Um, so by understanding this, it allows you to evaluate a little bit better and also to not take personally the behavior that cats can display when they're under distress or when they're experiencing trauma or even just when they're unsure or cats can suffer from self-esteem issues just like humans can, a lack of confidence that can affect their behavior and some of the ways that they act out. They can have trauma that they carry around from other things that can make them act aggressively. We've all heard the stories about the bully in the schoolyard. Well, it's because he's got maybe a crappy home life or has been mistreated himself and kind of, that's the only way he knows how to interact with people. So he carries that behavior forward. In the human world, that's very, very different um, in terms of how that's addressed. But with cats, they don't have the logical thought processes or the understanding of why a certain bit of behavior is acceptable. Again, when a cat acts out, for example, and a human gets upset about it, if a cat is reacting in a way that's instinctively normal for them, they're not going to understand why they're getting the intensity of the energy and the reaction that they're getting from the human being upset or, feeling insulted or feeling upset when really they're just kind of doing what they're wired to do. And in a lot of cases, this is where I run into problems in my work with people going, "Oh, my cat's just a jerk, and they just do it to make me mad." And they, I know that they're, whatever. And there are instances, absolutely, where cats are a little bit of a jerk, and they know that what they're doing is annoying. Um, and they do it to get a reaction. But even in that case, it's generally because that's a learned behavior that gets them a result that they want And very much like children who learn how to manipulate things to get the results out of a situation, a cat does have the complexity to understand that to some extent they can manipulate you. But most of the time, these types of reactions and behaviors from a cat are literally instinctive. They have nothing to do with you. And it's something that has been successful for their survival in the past. So that creates a strong neural connection to that being the solution. It's very much the same in human mental illness when a human has gone through trauma and they come up with maladaptive coping mechanisms. So, maybe they don't have much self-esteem, so their attention turns their focus turns to kind of attention seeking, but it becomes a negative thing. That's a maladaptive coping strategy to a core problem that, with a different approach or a better way for them to get the end goal, something that's a little more healthy for them, they could get there. But they also have to learn that that's a better way, a more acceptable way, or a healthier way. And a human, you can certainly counsel them on that and have that talk therapy and that conversation, and through repetition and continued work, they're going to absorb that, and it becomes their tools, and then they have the ability to make change happen in terms of their own reactions and whatnot. And that's a lot of that is the focus of different types of therapy like DBT and CBT and whatnot. It's not just the talk piece, but what that turns into is a translation into how your body reacts and how your neurons fire and what types of connections are made. You replace, and it's like changing habits. We hear often, if you want to remove a bad habit, you need to replace it with a good one. And that's actually a very good guideline for everything when it comes to cats. If you have a behavior that you disagree with, for example, a more powerful way to actually work on that behavior isn't just to say no and stop with that. You want to give them an alternative that allows them to still express that energy or that reaction, because they can't stop that. They can't not react. They don't have a choice in terms of reacting to that stimulus, but they can learn a better or a safer or more acceptable way to express that. A very good example of this is a cat that I had, who came into me, and I don't know a lot about her background, and they didn't either. She was extremely aggressive, to the point where everybody was basically terrified of her. The agency that she was with actually considered her a liability because she was so aggressive, nobody could handle her. And how do you adopt a cat like that, or even keep it in your facility when you have volunteers and other people that you have to think about their safety? And when people don't realize, an aggressive cat can really be a problem. They can be extremely dangerous and very detrimental. People don't realize. Those who've dealt with them absolutely know. And when this cat came to me, one of the problems is that she got very overstimulated. Her nervous system was just always on such an edge that any stimulation was enough to kind of like, push her beyond that point. And then, of course, she had to react. Well, in a lot of cases with animals, their first reaction to being overwhelmed is going to be one of two things. It's either going to be shut down or it's going to be aggression. Um, I'm going to get you before you get me kind of mindset. And because oftentimes, especially when dealing with humans, this can work. When a cat is stimulated and they're like, get away from me, get away from me, get away from me, and they act aggressively and the human retreats, that's a win for the cat. You've just reinforced to that cat that that behavior will get them their end goal. So once it works once, they're going to try again and they're going to keep trying it. And then it becomes something that becomes ingrained in their response. So I had this cat who was extremely fearful, and her automatic response had come to be aggression because she didn't want people around her. She felt that they were the problem. And by being aggressive, they went away. So that kind of solidified to her. And for me, that wasn't good enough. You're not going to find a cat home if they're like trying to attack everybody that they see, and they're not the cuddly kitty that everybody wants when they go to get a pet. But I wanted to get her there, and I knew she could get there. So with her, it was a matter of understanding. First off, her baseline nervous system was so high off the charts that the tiniest little thing could set her off. All right. Well, we can't necessarily stop that now. There's a process that you can follow to help reduce their baseline nervous system and the level of stimulation that they need to react to. But you can't always do that first. Um, that sometimes takes a little bit more time, and that's a longer plan. But how do you stop this cat from hurting people? What is an acceptable way for her to release her frustration and her fear and all of that stuff without somebody getting hurt? So first off, it was about figuring out how to, have kind of a surrogate while still interacting with her. And I used something that's worked for me a lot is I actually had her in a nice big comfortable cage out in a main area of the house so that she was insulated to some extent from the activity around, but she could observe it. When a cat, just like a person, is really anxious or afraid, they're not in a place to learn. And so, to get them secure, first you have to get them to start actually looking at what's going on around them and observing and taking that information and kind of absorbing it as opposed to just reacting. So one of the best ways I've found to do that is just expose the cats, but in a way where they feel like they're safe. So a crate or a pop-up or a large cage can be great because cats, they don't look at that necessarily as confinement, maybe at first, but cats in the wild will find little hidey holes and little spaces where they can still kind of observe the world, but they can be away from it. And in those moments when they feel safe and they can let their guard down a little bit, then they can observe and they can learn and they can kind of formulate behavior based off of that. And because I have other cats generally running around, cats also model behavior very well off of other cats. So she was seeing the other cats and how they reacted, but her problem was still how to react to stimulus. So when I go into the cage, I'd have a great big stuffed toy. It was the same size as her body, basically. And knowing that her first reaction was going to be aggression, I'd give her the toy. Um, so she'd take the toy and she would go after it just like she would of my arm if I put my arm in that cage. Absolutely. And I bled from her many times making that mistake. Um, but that initial rush of energy that she had to let go was released on the stuffed toy. So first thing that's happening is she's actually getting the satisfaction of that energy being released, right, which she needed to happen. But also not necessarily getting the satisfaction of me going away. I'm still here. So it wasn't a win for her in that she very quickly realized that the aggression wasn't actually getting the outcome she was looking for people to just go away and leave her alone. Um, so she was a little salty for a little while because she hadn't, really correlated humans with good things yet, but it allowed a way for me to interact with her where she was less dangerous in terms of me bleeding and everybody else. Um, but also where it could kind of start to change some of the wiring and some of the reactions and some of the ways that she was instinctively just kind of coming out and using the things that had worked for her in terms of behavior and having other outlets for that. So it kind of got to the point where the stuffed toy became a little bit of a game. She was almost like excited about that to some extent, where I'd come up to the cage and she knew what the routine was, and so I'd let her have the stuffed toy, and she'd go rank on the toy. But then afterwards, she'd have a moment of calm, and that moment of calm would last a little bit longer every time. And then I could spend time with her, not feeding stimulation at first because I didn't want to go past that. I just wanted her to tolerate my presence and it not be a point of stimulation. And because she had already like discharged that energy, that big burst of reaction, she really didn't have much juice left after that. Cats are very short burst animals. They don't they're not long, chasing prey for hours and hours. They're, bang, like cheetahs. Um, it's quick, it's an energy burst, and it's over. And then after that, they're conserving energy. So as she started to become more tolerant of my presence after that, and then started actually like, I got to the point where I could interact with her a little bit. I could touch her, but by having this boy there, if that was a little bit too much, she could take it out on that. But also, she wasn't getting the negative emotions, the negative energy directed back at her that a cat will generally receive after some type of an aggressive type of outburst. If a cat's aggressive towards you, your first reaction is, it's fear. You're running away. You're reacting. Maybe after that, that fear might turn anger a little bit or resentment. Cats feel that, and that reinforces kind of like that negativity coming out of that whole thing, and the whole process becomes a bit of trauma. Um, Whereas if the cat has that burst of energy, they start to realize the burst of energy isn't the problem. It's how they're acting, and that's what causes the withdrawal. And interestingly enough, if you look at the way that a mother cat will interact with her kittens, there's very little verbal communication in that case. And if a kitten is really acting out and annoying a mom, she's not punishing that kitten. She's withdrawing her attention. She ignores it. So she's taking away the reinforcement of that negative behavior. There's no negative reinforcement. So there's no negative connotation for the kitten. They just go, that didn't work. That didn't get any kind of reaction. I guess I'm going to abandon that particular behavior and do something that will actually get me what I'm looking for, which is attention from mom. So maybe instead of going up and biting her ears, I'm going to go up and give her a couple of kisses. And so they model that behavior that way, but we can kind of mimic that type of thing. One of the biggest quote unquote punishments, and it's not really even a punishment, it's more of a deterrent for a cat who's bonded to a person, in terms of you letting them know that their behavior isn't okay, is not yelling. It's not reacting at all. It's just walking away. And in cat speak, you're like, no, what you just did wasn't okay. So okay, I'm out. They understand that. And if you're maintaining your energy in that moment, you're not reacting like what a jerk, any of that kind of stuff. They're not picking up that energy from you. They're just picking up disappointment. And any owner of any kind of pet with any degree of social intelligence understands that, dog poops on the floor and they know they're not supposed to, and you come home and you catch it. That dog's going to act feeling guilty. The same is often the case with cats, where they will act out um, because they've disappointed you, and that's upset them. So if you're or you've yelled at them and you've kind of added more energy, they don't understand the context of what's going on in your head. They're not thinking in words, they're reacting to your energy. And in that case, it's kind of reinforcing the wrong things. So negative reinforcement doesn't work. Positive reinforcement works, or neutral. So being able to walk away and just disconnect and disengage in that moment, that's a conversation. You're removing your energy from the situation altogether. And in absence of that energy, if a cat is seeking you out, or they want to seek you out, that definitely has a very big impact. Cat speak, you're speaking volumes with saying nothing. And it's these type of principles that I've tried to really embody in all of the work, in the way that I give information to people, and the way that I tell them or try to instruct them on how to interpret their cat's behavior, and also to maintain their own energy. Again, I suffer from mental illness, so emotional regulation for years was kind of the bane of my existence. And I was still doing a lot of that work when I was working with cats. And I think we all have those days where, like, I had a crappy day at work. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna feel better. Or you get home and you don't really feel good, but you're gonna wing it. You're gonna fake it till you make it. And when people ask you how you're doing, you're like, I'm okay. I'm doing all right. You try to talk yourself up a little bit, but inside that energy isn't really reflecting like what you're feeling. And oftentimes we put on these faces with regards to how we're feeling to interact with the human world. But cats, you are absolutely not fooling them. I would come home from work and be like, I had a really rough day. I'm going to take a little bit of time, and I have these cats I need to work with. I'm going to go do that, and I'm okay. I'm in an okay place mentally and emotionally to work with this cat, but I really wasn't. I just felt driven by the fact that I knew these cats needed work and needed homes, and every day that they weren't doing that, I got myself into kind of a tizzy about it. But then I'd go into a room to work with a cat who was in extreme distress, not being honest with myself about my energy. And 9 times out of 10, I was either leaving having created an incident that didn't need to happen, and creating a little bit more fear in the cat because they don't know how to interpret my energy. All they see is the energy. They don't see the reasoning behind it. So they automatically are going to assume it's about them. Um, or I'd leave Buddy because that cat was like, "Nah, nah, nah. You're supposed to be calm. You're supposed to be in a good, centered mental place when you come to me. Don't bring that chaotic energy to me and try and foist it off, because it's not real and I'm not having it." And in that way, the cats very much have taught me in extreme ways the importance of really being mindful of our own energy and of our own thoughts and emotions and how we're coping and dealing. And it got to a point where, um, because I kind of had that external a little bit, it really helped me in terms of regulating my emotions and being honest with myself about how I was feeling. So I, have that day coming home from work and be like, I really need to work with this cat, but I'm on being honest with myself in that I'm not in a good place to do this work today. And if I try to force it, I'm not being honest with myself or with the cat. And why would the cat trust me if I am not even being honest with myself? They sense that dissonance and that disharmonious bond between heart and your mind, where if you're not believing in yourself and you're not, being honest with yourself about how you're feeling and how you're thinking, they won't accept it. So, anybody who's having problems with their cats or is trying to create even a closer bond with their cats, or is working with rescue cats or troubled cats, the very best advice I can give to anybody, absolutely anybody, and this works for everybody, is check yourself. Check yourself first. Um, Make sure that a cat is not reacting to you and to the energy that you're conveying in a way that makes sense to them, in their little cat world, but is coming out in a very negative way in terms of how you have to deal with it. Check yourself. Yeah, if you've had problems with the cat, maybe you've had a couple cats that have been fighting. I hear this actually a lot. I experience this a lot with two people who have cats that have been fighting, and are having internal issues, and they separate. Pardon me, and they separate them in their head when they go to kind of employ some of the techniques or the programs that I might help develop for those particular cats. They're going into it already having that image in their mind of their cat screaming and the fur flying and all of that, and that's there. And for as much as they want a better outcome while they're dealing with those cats, that's all they can think about is that mental image of the negativity and the nastiness and the trauma that they take from that, and them being concerned and scared, and it can be scary. Um, but because they're going into the process already anxious, already nervous, and the cat, they're the basis, of the relationship with the cats. They're going into the process without trust, that bad things won't happen. So the cats are sensing that energy going, oh, well, why should we trust anything? This person thinks that bad things are going to happen. So, and I take many of my cues from them. So bad things are going to happen. So I'm going to be ready. And then the opposite effect of what they're looking for actually ends up happening. And a lot of that is because of their own energy, and that they're maintaining this negative image. And one of the biggest things that I encourage people to do, and I try to do myself, is picture the best possible scenario. Picture in your head exactly, if this was a storybook and you were writing it, what would you like to see happen? What is the outcome you're looking for? Do you want these two cats to just get along? Do you want them to be best friends? And picture in your head, if you can, or have a narrative in your head of this is how this is going to turn out. and then go back into that situation with that positive imagery and that kind of like ultimate outcome in the back, and that by maintaining your calm demeanor, that's the outcome that you can get. And quickly you'll find that, the cats will respond to that because you're trusting yourself and you're portraying and putting off that trusting energy and a positive outcome. Cats are always going to gravitate towards trust and positivity and to calmness. And, if they're taking their cues from you and that's the cues you're giving them, you are setting them up for success. And much of it is really about taking what you know about your own cats and minding your own energy, taking in a little bit of that communication, but really setting yourself up and them up for success. They're not dogs, they're not people, they're cats. They react differently. And to figure out their problems and to help them, we kind of have to think differently. We have to think about how they approach things and how they interpret things and what they mean. Hope that helps. It's a start. There's a lot. Anybody who's still following along at this point, good for you. And I look forward to talking to everybody a little bit more about cats and feline DBT and how these things can help you with your cat problems.